It's really important, I think, for people to appreciate adaptation by thinking about it in terms of sort of our right to approach a story from a lot of different angles. You're really just taking the core idea of something that's kind of slight, and you're embellishing and inventing and creating something else that speaks back to the original thing, but isn't the thing itself. One of the things thinking about Little Women is that people would often say to me, with such a faithful adaptation. But the truth is, we left out a ton of that book. There was just a lot that there was no room for in the movie. But what we did try to do was capture what it was that Louisa May Alcott wanted to do with her novel. And so trying to understand the author's intention, I think, helps make something feel like it's a faithful adaptation when it's not. But I also think that there's nothing wrong with an unfaithful adaptation, as long as it works on its own terms. But for people who are really in love with a book, they are not going to necessarily want there to be any kind of change.
"Revenge is mine," quoth he. Excellent installment, Mr. Snodgrass.
You know, I had read Little Women as a little girl. By the time I was 16, I had seen the other iterations of Little Women that were available to be seen, which were two movies. One at that time was from the 1950s and one that with Katharine Hepburn. I really loved Katharine Hepburn as Jo, but my problem with that movie and other movies was that it wasn't what the core of the book was about. Both of those movies were about who were these girls going to marry. And even when I was 8, I knew that the book was about who will these girls become. And so the core of that book for me was about ambition and desire and young girls growing up with some idea of who they were.
If I were going to be a writer, I'd go to New York and pursue the stage. Are you shocked?
Very.
So when I became a screenwriter, one of the first things I wanted to do was to answer that childhood wish. I couldn't imagine that anyone would love this book more than me. And I was so committed in a way to trying to do this adaptation so that it reflected my reading of the book. And so when I started walking around Hollywood, first of all, there were practically no women who were writing movies at that time. And certainly no one was writing for a female audience at that time. So walking around and saying I want to do a new adaptation of Little Women was getting me absolutely nowhere, except that I met Amy Pascal. So she took me to lunch, and that's how I met her, and her name was Amy Beth, and we talked about Little Women, and those were, her mother had loved Little Women and had named her after 2 characters of the book. And we said, we should do this. And we started trying to set that up without any success at all. 12 years after that, she had been the overseeing studio executive on League of Their Own and Groundhog Day, which were 2 big hits. And they had finally said to her, you can develop something of your own. And she just turned right around and said, let's do Little Women. So it was the great joy of sitting down with my friend and finally, for both of us, making a dream come true. At a certain point, Amy said, I've been thinking that it may be time for a new Little Women, for a new generation. What do you guys think of that? And we talked about a lot of things like, oh, should we do it for film or should it be for TV, for instance? Neither of us really disagreed with her that we both thought it was would be interesting to see what somebody from the next generation wanted to do. It was hard for us to imagine what that would look like. And then Denise suggested Greta Gerwig, and I thought, wow, she's a really interesting young filmmaker. For me, what makes the film so interesting is that it's a different point of view, that she's looking at the book anew, and she's taking things from the book that I didn't put into my screenplay, things that fascinated her. It was a way of looking at that family in a very contemporary way. She brought a kind of looseness and modern and contemporary feeling to it that is its own thing.
I've always known I would marry rich. Why should I be ashamed of that?
There's nothing to be ashamed of, as long as you love him.
Well, I believe we have some power over who we love. It isn't something that just happens to a person.
I think the poets might disagree.
Well, I'm not a poet. I'm just a woman.
You know, I think that this book is really a work of genius in the sense that it's timeless. It's an extraordinary work of memory and art. I think that people keep coming back to it because that world of women, the veil is lifted, and behind it there are these figures that have only been shadows in history. And they are these real people, each of them so different. Each of them was such a longing for something that's slightly beyond their reach. It feels a lot like real life when you feel how modern everything is in the book. And I think that's why people keep coming back to it. It's like the way we come back to Shakespeare. You know, we say, oh, it's historical, but then once you get in there, you're going, no, it's modern. And you just want to participate with that.